Our copyright strike. I'm gonna play some Third Eye Blind and rock out because I figure my video is called God of Wine, Dionysus. So what better song to rock out to than Third Eye Blind, God of Wine? But here we are in Galatians chapter 1, and we're dealing with the 15th verse. It said, but when the so I'm going to try to read it from the Greek. It says here, but when it pleased God who separated me from my mother's womb, that's a reference to Jeremiah. And he say right here, separating me from my mother's womb, called me by his grace to reveal his son in me. To reveal his son in me. If you look at some translations, they'll say to reveal his son to me. And the good old King Jimmy doesn't say to me. It has the proper Greek right here. Um, so his is atu, and in is in. So and me is amoy, but that's not really important. So when it comes to his aton and in ato, and his is in, and then if you look at uh, chapter 23 of the book of Matthew, his disciples are showing him in chapter 24 of Matthew. It says uh, they left the temple and walking away with the disciples came up to him and called his attention to the buildings. Do you see all these things? So we're in Galatians. It says to reveal his son in me. It says reveal apocalypse. Apocalypse. So that's the apocalypse. So his preconceived notions will be kind of changed by a revelation. So this is the same word kind of as the book of Revelation to when he revealed his son to me. So he was going one way. He'll tell you in Galatians. It says right here, we were on 115, verse 16. Um, he said he didn't go to Jerusalem in verse 17. And then in 14, he says how he was in Judaism. So that's very much the topic of 14 of chapters 15 or verses 15 and 16, verses 14, Judaism, and verse 17, Jerusalem. And uh, but it can also mean something else. That's it's talking about. It could mean killing because you have a similar word in chapter 23 of Matthew, where we were very near when dealing with 24 1 and 2 and so on. But here we are in Matthew 23:37. It says, all these things will come on this generation that's Ghanaian generation, and Jerusalem, that's Jerusalem, Jerusalem, and it says, um, for the killing, that's the apakatanasa. The apakatanasa. Well, here we have the apocalypse. So they're not quite the same words, but there may be a certain, especially Paul being a person of Jewish persuasion, he's going to very much believe in certain things, such as the last days. But the last days to him, it's true in Islam too, comes with what's you call that? The resurrection. So as Jesus says in John chapter 4, salvation comes through the Jews. This has to do with baptism, angels, resurrection, the last days, all these things of the Parthian Empire. So when you talk about Rome at this time period, it wasn't like the days of Alexander the Great, where all of Persia and Babylon was under the control of Rome. That was still, through a lot of history, not controlled by the West. And Palestine was controlled by the West up until maybe the 7th century AD. And again in the 11th century AD. And that might have just been in part. But here he said, revealing his son in me. So some of the incorrect translations, like maybe 1 out of 10, will say reveal his son to me. So they're taking liberty of perception and interpretation and translation. So what they're basically saying is, well, I believe this to be a physical thing that happened in history, and this would be an explicit, um, honestly, like, it's verifiable. It's like this happened. A lot of times with the problem with like a lot of Greek myths is, and Babylonian myths is, like, and especially Egyptian myths, a lot of them come from a time that people weren't really literate, and it wasn't really the privy of the average person to have the stories as much as their folklore images and traditions and things like this. And here's Paul coming with a new way. St. Paul, as we're talking about in Galatians, the apostle is writing in about 50 AD, and where we had been talking before could have been, 950 BC. So we're talking about 1,000 years of a time of antiquity where people were very illiterate, and so like the legends of David and stuff like that, they could have existed in a oral tradition, um, every before coming into a written form. The Psalms, could have been spoken and sung before ever being written, potentially. And when we're dealing with Matthew here, it says, I never showed you what we're talking about here. It says, answering them. So they begin to show him. So this is not the word apocalypse, it's epidesi. So it's not the same word. So they say show him the buildings. This is, it's almost like it's got the word for households, oiko, in here. So they show to him, they show him. So that's atao. So they're just showing disciples of him. So that's atao. So when we saw the other one, it said his son. So this is the same word, his disciples. When we were reading Galatians, it said to reveal his son in me. It said his son. So we did have the same word, atao, but it doesn't say in like it does in Galatians 1 16. It's here in Matthew 24:1. It just says it show him the buildings. So it doesn't say show him in me. That was in moi in the Greek, it just says show him the buildings. And here we see that same prefix as we saw in killed, and we saw in revealed, and it's apoc. It's and here he says answering them. So here you have this idea, kind of like people wonder, and then it's resolved. Now you have the answer, and that puts an end to it. So God of Wine is over. Let's listen to some old blues. I'm already on copyright strike, so I guess to Sky Limit. But I want to play something old anyways. Okay. So it says so here we had in Galatians 1, it says revealing his son in me. And we all know that Paul wasn't one of the disciples who was with Jesus in his earthly ministry. Here we got a guy who comes much later, and his only claim to fame amongst the apostles is, oh yeah, I was against you, and now trust me now. And so the Acts of the Apostles deals with this. There was actually a bloke who I can't remember offhand who I'm speaking of, but he just said like, no, I think we're gonna trust this guy, and it worked out for the better because Paul, uh, you know, is definitely a giant in this whole thing. And if and Paul's going to go his own way no matter what, as he says here in that chapter we're just reading, Galatians 1, that he wasn't really worried about what was going on in Jerusalem. Acts isn't really clear what he did compared to when you do with what he goes in Galatians. It's like, did he go back and forth from Tarsus and Jerusalem and everywhere else in these upcoming years, or is it, as Paul said in Galatians, which we tend to think is a pretty authentic book? If anything is going to be Pauline, it's going to be Galatians or Corinthians, or especially Romans. But nonetheless, there are many books under the pen name that are pseudepigraphical, maybe. But so what is the thing that's Paul going? So honestly, this video is exciting. So I do ask you to stay to the end, because I think it'll be worth your while. Because this is honestly kind of crazy. But I want to give you a quick trigger warning. The things we're going to be dealing with are going to be that in Galatians 1:16, revealing Christ in me. And I'm going to differ from most Christians. I'm quite the heretic. Quite the preterist, quite the cessationist, quite the deist. I'm not quite full deist, full preterist, nor full whatever else I said, but it's definitely not really with the mainstream. And as a heretic, I don't have any authority to tell you, but I think that a lot of people are misleading you. Like, oh, I got the Holy Spirit and I'm grabbing a snake and I'm falling on the floor and I'm speaking in tongues and I'm quite loud and causing quite a scene, and nor do I believe all these, just tithe and you get your blessing. And like I don't believe like a lot of things that dispensationalism, of course, I'm far against, and a lot of other things. But I do have an opinion here. And so Paul had said, Christ in me. So I think that people are misleading others by telling them, oh, you need to have a personal relationship with Jesus. And then you have these Christians that are singing songs by atheists to have a personal Jesus, and atheists singing songs that are covers of Christians, I mean, covers of atheists that are my own personal Jesus. And it's like, what are these things people agreeing on? And that's very much the point of this video today, is to try to get to the answer of what that means. I don't believe in, a God like that, and that nor does anybody else. We're in society today, we have more of a God of the gaps than other folks may have had. Like, I was reading about this bloke here. His name was Adonis. And no, I'm not talking about Apollo Creed's son, Adonis Creed. I'm talking about Zeus' his son. No, was he? I don't remember. His parents were Cineras and Mira, whoever they are. Maybe Phoenix. Phoenix was one of his parents, or Hesiod. Is that the serpent? I don't know. So Adonis, this dude died, and he was very, very popular. And turns out that in the very region, it says right here, Levantine, so and Canaanite, like that's as central as you can possibly get to the region that's the topic. Like I said here in Galatians 1:17, Jerusalem. And uh I mean, if this is happening, more towards the sea, but also towards the desert, when you have let's say the god of wine being up to something that's only the Edomians have their version of, but the Jerusalem would never ever have, even though right next door. And then in Hebron, even you have in Hebron, that's in the desert of Caleb. So Caleb, what was he? The Kenizzite, so son of Abraham. And you have like the Rechabites, and you have other people that are sons of Abraham, the father of many nations. But here we have, it says his whole name. So like, how Jewish people will put the word Adonai in place of Yahweh. Is it? I can't remember. It's one of them. Maybe it was Christians put Adonai and Jewish people just put Adonai. But whatever it is, here we were looking at Adonis, and it says his name comes from the Canaanite word meaning Lord. Um, and this bloke died and came back to life or something, or maybe just died. Like that might be something that the dying and rising God is criticized by, is that some of the examples they used maybe were more known for dying than rising, but like Persephone, I think would die and rise every year as the seasons do. So this Adonis, who was the mortal lover of Aphrodite and Persephone. So here, this guy is known for lettuce and fennel. So these are ones that, when it's time to harvest them, you just harvest them. So if you're going to plant lettuce, you're going to want to plant a little bit every now and again. You're not going to want to plant it, and you're only going to be able to plant it in certain seasons, nonetheless, anyways, because it's going to all be ready at the same time and just eating lettuce. And so, and this is there are lots of angiosperms that are annual, and lettuce and fennel are not even that closely related. So it's dealing with a lot big swath. So they would die. And in Egypt, under a different season, they'd have their own, like Osiris would die and rise, and this had to do with the seasons. We still have in Christianity. The seasons are often dealt with in like rice farmers will use a lunar cycle. In Islamic countries, they only use lunar, and we use a little bit of a lunar in the solar calendar to deal with Easter, but Easter is very important because it's mostly based on the solar idea, and it happens when you start to have uh, you know longer days than nights. So it's basically like the sun um, rising, and then of course Christmas being when the days start getting longer again, and this stuff is very much to do with the seasons, and the seasons they're dependent on, mostly on the solar uh, aspects, and so Adonis was beautiful, they say, and this is something that became ever increasingly to do with uh, Bacchus, and Bacchanalia was outlawed by Rome before all this. So you got to understand that Bacchus was very popular before all this, to have to outlaw it, and Bacchus is based on Dionysus, who was a increasingly younger looking guy. Um, in origin, a Semitic nature deity. So that's where he started with. And the consort of Ishtar, Astarte, who was killed by a boar while hunting. That's Adonis. And Athena, I think, has something to do with it. I talked about Athena before. I think, wasn't she the one that was talking about how David was kind of turned into a stag by um, his voyeurism, and how he's punished for it? This happened to somebody who was looking at Diana or something. I can't remember all the deets. Oh no. All right, so his also name is Liber Pater. So this is like, you know Yeshua, kind of like Yahweh is salvation kind of idea. Maybe, I don't know, but the god of fruitfulness, vegetation, especially the god of wine and ecstasy. So this should um, be where we deal with. I didn't even think to deal with this, but because I just uh, kind of keep in the back of my head. But let's just run right here and deal with real quick where this is talked about in the New Testament, where says, "You know how when you were pagans, you were constantly attracted and led away to mute idols." That's not a good rendering. Let's see what the Greek says. So First Corinthians chapter 12. It says here. Let's see what the KGB says. You know that you were Gentiles carried away unto those dumb idols. Yet even ye were led. NIV says, you know, when you're pagan somehow or other, you were influenced and led astray to dumb idols. What's the Greek say? Apagamonoi. I don't know. I've read a lot to think that this apagamonoi is like ecstasy, like, these people feeling kind of tantric, and excited because of uh, this is why people go to temple too. I mean, this is very popular nowadays in Christian churches, like I was saying earlier, with people falling on the floor and shaking and acting up and holding their hands up and everything else, dancing. And I'm as guilty as the next person too. I'm not trying to cast no stones or anything. uh but yeah, I was really talking all this to talk about Dionysus. So let me get back to it. So because I happen to believe that this Christ in me is dealing with how somebody sees things, because when it comes to how a lot of these nations were looking at their gods, it wasn't based on historical events, because what would that even mean? They didn't have the writing systems we have to document these people. So were they people? So this gets into what Paul's talks about, or pseudo Pauline talks about in Titus, where it says, you know, what's he say in Titus? He says, okay, so my memory don't work anymore. Okay, Titus comes before Hebrews. See, I told you my memory don't work. All right, because this is pseudo Pauline, so it's gonna come before Hebrews. That's how you know. And it says, even one of their own prophets has said, Cretans are always liars, evil brutes, lazies, and gluttons. So back in the day, back when this was written, it was well known in the area to like Cretanize or Corinthicize, or like there was these certain regions that were known for being Gentile regions, that they were just like, you guys are liars. And so here's this Cretan that wrote this, Epimenides or something, and he goes like, well, I know that you guys are liars. You guys are all liars. This whole nation. He's kind of a cynic, like this is Greeks, ancient Greeks is where we get these ideas like cynicism and stuff like that. And so he's like an outcast kind of, and he's like writing this poetry. And there was a few guys who wrote this exact same thing. Actually, it was that well known. It was taken for granted that, like, yeah, these words are true. Like, so, and they carry on as true today, but in a different way. Like Bertrand Russell, I think, used this to talk about the liar's paradox, where it's like, well, the liar says he's lying. Well, is he telling the truth when he's lying then? That's a paradox. So here's this Cretan talking about all Cretans are liars. It's well argued that he didn't even mean what he means to say. Like when David said, "All men are liars," there's nobody good. Psalm of David. Well, here he was like, I'm asking you, do you know why he said all Cretans are liars? Well, believe it or not, they they had like these places, like temples of Zeus, especially in Crete. I don't know if it was like the sea people found a nice home base, and this is what they do. Like, there could be somebody. Oh, my great 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 grandfather was Rothschild, and now I want to just surf and like protect the environment and things like that. Well, so you have like back then, kind of maybe people that they were really elite, and yeah, they just wanted to go to Crete, and all they wanted to do was, just focus on having a military and just being brutes, and they weren't even well learned or something. And this was a big diss on them. So Like the Philistines, it says in Amos 9:17, came from these Mediterranean islands. I don't know if you got AI in Hebrew, but nonetheless, you have these people who, these Cretans, like Titus. That's what this is all about. When I was just I'm referring to the book of Titus. So Paul's telling Titus that there are Jewish people like all over, and it's just the same problem he has in, especially in Thessalonica, in Colossia, and all this. He's like, they want you to believe in all these things, and they got this false gospel, and they might even proclaim Jesus, but he was revealed in me. So listen to what I'm telling you about what Jesus said. And what does Paul talk about in Corinthians? He talks about the Eucharist, the communion, and this is something Jesus Christ talked about. I mean, if we just go to John chapter 5, and look at the red ink. There's a lot of red ink in John 5. I mean, the book of John in general has a lot of relatively a lot of red ink. Well, this is interesting. Do not be amazed at this. The hour is coming, which all the tombs will hear his voice and come out of those who have done good deeds, and the resurrection of life. But those who have wicked deeds, to the resurrection of condemnation. And this is very important to Paul. Paul being a Pharisee, this is very important. He comes from a Zoroastrian tradition. So, and the Pharisees were, a lot of them, boots on the ground for the Parthians to control the Levantine, and in being so, a lot of them, when were existing in Western societies, were not in favor of supporting the government of that area. And so Paul, this idea of the resurrection, Luke in Acts, he attests to this. Luke in Acts, he will tell you that Paul is getting in these arguments in the Kahal Gadol, in the great assemblies, about the resurrection. And this is a problem, like, because the Sadducees, before the Pharisees came in, ruled it all. So when you're dealing with the Hasmoneans, you're not going to see the Pharisees maybe in the martyrs of that time, but they weren't very popular. The Hasmoneans were not privy to the resurrection. This comes from the Zoroastrians. And so when they were dealing with their Western Easternism, they had this idea that was very Torah based, especially being Levites, the Hasmoneans. And same with the Samaritans of the day. And the Samaritans is where they get their Hebrew from. And so the Samaritans, they didn't have much of a resurrection, but they'll tell you, all of them will tell you, people who are, Samaritans, or they're Karaites, or different people, they'll tell you, yeah, we believe in the resurrection. But it's not that clear. I mean, even in the prophets, when they're talking about resurrection, I'd argue they're talking about the nation coming back. They're talking about symbolism. So when Osiris rises from the dead, I mean, that's in a way symbolism too. I mean, are we supposed to believe Osiris is a real person that existed on time and came back from the dead? I mean, it's just what it means to you for your culture and your traditions. And we have that same thing. I mean, you go to church today, they talk about resurrection. It's still, I mean, this is what Paul talks about in Corinthians. If there's no resurrection, then there's no hope for him. And so when we're dealing with this quote that all Cretans are always liars. I mean, the Greek is really fascinating right here. It says he must hold. It says uh, holding fast the faithful word that has been taught, that he may be able to sound doctrine, both to exhort and convince the gainsayers. For there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision. The circumcision is the circumcision of the flesh. This is Paul. This is Timothy. This is not Titus. He tells you that. And it says, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses. This is these liars, these false teachers he's talking about. Whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses and teachings. It says oikos, right? Remember we deal with oikos earlier? Let me check that. 11. Yeah, oikos, households. And it says whose mouths must be stopped, to subvert whole houses, teaching things that they ought not, for filthy lucre's sake. One of themselves, even a prophet of their own. A prophet of their own. So let's go to 12. It says a certain one of them atone, his. So what does it mean to be his, their prophet? Or we just believe that Epimenides and all these guys that wrote this way back in the days of Herodotus, 6th century BC, are they Jewish folks? No, there weren't any Jewish folks on Crete. The Assyrians didn't control Crete. I mean, maybe there was few and far between. What I think Paul is saying here, which I can't find anybody who corroborate what I'm saying, but I do think that when he said one of their own prophets, is that this is how they viewed the outsider. And remember when Peter had to be rebuked by Paul, like he couldn't even eat at people's houses, go into their houses, and so I think that's what Paul is saying, is when he says one of their own says all Cretans are liars. Like that's what he's saying right here. He says, filthy lucre, one of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said, the Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. This witness is true, Paul says, or pseudo Paul says. Wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in faith, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of them that turn from the truth. So are we to believe that Paul isn't talking about one of their own? What Paul is saying, the apostle is saying, is that they felt like this, that they believed that Cretans, I mean, the same way Athenians did. They believed the Minotaur lived there, and the Minotaur was a beast, and Minos had kidnapped Christopus or something. I don't even remember all the deets, but yeah, not good. And Paul is saying, you folks who give into these fables are the same folks that are saying Cretans are liars, basically. And so David says, there is not one good among them, but David was one kind of like Lamech. He would feel justified. He was, like Cain, put on to exile, sent out, cast away, and but he was preserved. So this is a story of very much like the exile of the entire nation is the story of Cain. It's like, oh, there's a sign, like let's say circumcision, that you were preserved for this purpose down the road. But this purpose ends in what Paul's saying, being a last days prophet. He's repeatedly saying things like, in these last days, at this time, the mystery has now been revealed, and it's very apocalyptic. He's saying don't even get married, because it's all just going to end in this generation. And so it's very much about that apocalypse. And Paul, being a Jewish person, is going to have certain sensibilities that lead him to make certain conclusions, and it's not based on his revelation in Jesus Christ. It's things that he got from his own teachers and his own parents from even before. But here he is a grown man in Acts 17, and it says here in verse 13, but the Jews of Thessalonica heard that the word of God had been now preached by the apostle in Berea. Also, they came here to cause a commotion and stir up the crowd. So the brothers at once sent the apostle on his way to the seacoast, while Silas and Timothy remained behind. After the apostle escorts had taken him to Athens, they came away with instructions, Silas and Timothy to join as possible. So he debated in the synagogue with the Jews, with the worshippers, daily in the public square, with whomever happened to be there. Even some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers engaged him in discussion. Some asked, What is this scavenger trying to say?" Others, "He sounds like a promoter of foreign deities, because he's preaching about Jesus and the resurrection." It says right here in the notes, the followers of Epicurus of approximately the fourth and third centuries BC. The goal of life was happiness attained through sober reasoning and searching out the motives of choice and avoidance. The Stoics were followers of Zeno, a young contemporary of Alexander the Great. Zeno and his followers believed in a type of pantheism that held that the spark of divinity, the divine spark, was present in all reality, and that in order to be free, each person must live according to nature. The scavenger, literally seed picker, as of the bird. So, like, what they won't tell you about Islam is a lot of it comes from Greek knowledge that a lot of others have avoided. And that here it says, the word later is used to scrap collectors and people who take other people's ideas and propagate them as if they were their own, promoter of foreign deities. According to Xenophon, Socrates was accused of promoting new deities. The accusation against Paul accused the charge against Socrates. Jesus and the resurrection. The Athenians presented as a misunderstanding Paul from the outset. They think that preaching about Jesus in the God's name, anastasis, i.e., resurrection. I disagree. I think that they were familiar with resurrection, as we're reading about these Greek deities right now. So Dionysus was the son of Zeus, and Semele, a daughter of Cadmus, king of Thebes. Thebes is what I was talking about earlier. That's, I think, the king of Minos was from. Or maybe I'm thinking of Laos. King Laos is another popular one. Yeah, that was thinking of King Laos. Out of jealousy, Hera, the wife of Zeus, persuaded the pregnant Semele to prove her love's divinity by requesting that he appear in a real person. Zeus complied. So what's interesting? Oh yeah, we never read in John 5. In John 5, it said something really provocative. Was it John 6? Oh, yeah. That's why I couldn't find it. John 6. All right. It says, I tell you the truth, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but the Father who gives you true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. And it says, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry, and he who believes in me will never be thirsty. But I told you, you have seen me and still do not believe. So the Jews began to murmur against him, said, I am the bread that came down from heaven. They said, is it not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and his mother we know? How can we say, I came down from heaven? Stop murmuring amongst yourselves. Jesus said, no man can come to me except the Father which has sent draw him. Okay, here goes. Verse 51 of John 6. If any man eat of this bread, he says, I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat this bread, he shall live forever. The bread that I give you is my flesh. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine that? Could you imagine this scene where these people are arguing with him amongst crowds of people, and after a miracle, and it's going down, and they want to put their hands on him, and he's just talking back, and here he says, verily I say unto you, except you eat of the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood. This is John 6. This is way back at the beginning of the ministry, pretty near. And it's hard to tell because the cleansing of the temple happens at the beginning of John. But I would say, how can this man give him his flesh to eat? Then Jesus said to him, verily, verily, I say unto you, except you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever soever eateth, and here's saying, eat my flesh, eat me. But it's not like eat me. It means like consume me. He said, verily I say unto you, except you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whosoever eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood hath eternal life, and will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is meat indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. And he that eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood dwelleth in me, and I in him. And just the idea of eating a human's flesh and blood is quite repulsive, especially to Jewish sensibilities. But here he was talking to Jewish people, and him himself being a witness of the resurrection and the Jewish faith and everything else. And it's not Jewish as we know today, because Jewish as we know today is because the Christians didn't want the term, and they let it go, maybe to symbolize a conversion like Paul had, but they kept certain words. Like they would still refer to non-Christians as Gentiles and pagans and stuff like that, and they considered themselves Israel and stuff like that. But they didn't care for the name Jewish for whatever reason. I don't mind the name. I think it's a good name. More power to it. But they didn't like it. And so the Jewish people, whenever they came onto the scene, who knows, maybe in Europe 1,000 years ago, who knows, but it was open for the taking. They were able to expropriate it easily. That doesn't mean that their tradition is preeminent or superseded or pre-existed any Christians use the Old Testament. That's part of their scriptures, and they're following the threads of tradition throughout this thing. You can see it how there's lots of cross references in the study of Bible that refer to the Old Testament. You can go to these places and see where these New Testament authors are referring to the Old Testament. Even ones that may have very well been Greek Gentiles, as we say today. Like Luke. And this is incredible. This is incredible. So he's talking about this resurrection right here. Paul, he's in like Europe, and he's going to like where all the pagans are, and he's like, yo. And it's just the most interesting thing. And it says, the God that made the whole world in it. And honestly, like where our brain goes is like right to the Father. But Zeus has a father. Like honestly, Zeus has a father. You can't just think of like the one father. And honestly, call me crazy, but honestly, like Yahweh seemed kind of small in the beginning. Like honestly, it seems like there's this guy El or El Shaddai or whatever there is, El Elohim, and yeah, Yahweh becomes Elohim, but when, like in the time of Exodus and stuff, it's like he's way up there. He can't even come to Earth, and if he does, it's going down. It's serious, but he's not going to act like these other sons of God and have daughters of men, and who knows? But like he's just a burning bush and a still small voice, and this and that, and um, only few people know about him, and uh, you know, there's a whole council of gods, and they each got their own nation. So if he's only representing one nation, is he the Most High God? Then I mean, he might have taken the role and expropriated it, the crown, but it doesn't mean that that's what the story says, that it's always been the case. And it says here he went to Mars Hill, I guess. I don't know. This version doesn't say Mars Hill, but I think they translated it. And Mars, like when you hear Campus Martius, it's a reference to how, I don't know, the god Hermes or whomever Mars is like the god of war, and he this is his campus. This is where the military live or something. And this is uh so when we read John, it says that all things were made and through him, and by no thing was made not by him. And so that's the word, Jesus Christ. So I would invite that we're not talking strictly about physical things. This has never really been what we're talking about. So, I'm not big on this. I'm probably the only Christian you ever meet that is not sure Jesus existed in the flesh, because I believe it's what you take from it. It means the same thing as we read it, because we weren't there. It's just what experience you can have with it is true to you, regardless if it happened. And anybody who is against the New Testament, I don't see how you can be for anything, because to any other religion, it's not quite, cutting mustard. Like, oh, David said blah blah blah. It's like, well, if David said blah blah blah, how can you say Jesus didn't say blah blah blah? Is how I look at it, because it's like, you, you know, many years go by with nobody writing anything down. Then you have somebody say, well, that's what he said, and it's like, well, you don't really have proof. Then so it doesn't become a matter of true the way a lot of people think of truth. Truth becomes whether or not these ideas are true. Jesus was in my heart, that when you change, when you are destroyed, which is the idea of baptism by fire, it's a very biblical idea. We don't go after the same fleshly things, the new man born again, born anew can, with this novel feeling of childlike wonder, appreciate the world enough to do well and be transformed. And so when it comes to Paul here, I would like to invite that he's talking about Jesus. Um, so it says here he ordered the seasons and the boundaries and regions. So what you're saying is probably, oh, therefore he's referring to Chronos, who sets things in order. So that would be like the Father God, and the Son of God would be more like Yahweh, because Yahweh is, not Chronos. Because, like, when you read the Greek, it's like the word for the divinely appointed time, Kairos, is, I think, related to the word Kyrion, which is lordship. And that when it says Yahweh, that's what it means, lordship. It says the Lord. And so when it comes to Kronos being the father of Zeus and the Titans, it's like, well, Kronos put things in order, and that's like the deist father god, whereas Zeus with the like the thunderbolts and stuff like that would be more like Baal, the son of God, that has his same authority and office, but is his offspring, and so you're down to level 3 by this point, the third generation. And it says, um he made the whole people so that people might see God, even perhaps grope for him and find him through indeed he is not far from any one of us, for in him we all live and move and have our being. And that's more, I think, reminiscent of Jesus Christ than God the Father, as even some of your poets have said, for we too. So he's talking about Greek poets. So for the Greek poet is saying, for we too, and Paul's agreeing with this, are his offspring. Since therefore we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the divinity is like an image fashioned from gold. So God, this invisible God, this is what this verse starts out with. He goes up here and says there's an unknown God. And he's saying, oh yeah, this is the one that I'm talking about. Like he was probably like a blank spot, like just an empty spot. It's like, yep, that's the unknown God, the unknown soldier. And these temples were like, that's what they said, all Cretans are liars. These temples were like if you go to like the temple of Samuel, it's where Samuel died. If you go like the temple of Abraham, it's like where Abraham died in the wilderness of Caleb or something. And that's what they said, like the Cretans. They said, oh, our temple of Zeus, this might be where all the elites, were posted up with their boats and their ships and their merchant ships. They might have said, yeah, our temple to Zeus is actually where his body is, so beat that. So that way, that's why they're saying, oh, all Cretans are liars, because they basically believe that they got the tomb of the living God when we all know he rose up again. And so Paul is going to refer to this again. These same Greek poets that are talking about the same thing about Zeus dying, and like what he's talking about Titus being a Cretan, is like, yeah, don't listen to these Jewish people. they think all Cretans are liars. And they're not the only ones. Athenians and everyone else does too. But they too will agree with that. They probably wrote it into their own scriptures. And especially because they hate Philistines. And it says, um, for in him we live, since therefore we are offspring of God. God has overlooked times of ignorance, but now demands that all people ever repent, because he established this day on which we establish a day, the day of judgment, which he will judge the whole world through a man he has appointed. And this is talked about in Psalms a lot. This is supposed to be David. You know, all the nations were against him, and he was going to rise up and create. His son was going to create a worldwide nation, and this also really came up big in the times when the Hasmoneans started to lose in the later Daniel period. Um, you know, like even after Daniel wasn't even written until after the New Testament. So like Daniel 12 and stuff like that is very late. It's not even in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Um, when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, so he says, when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some began to scoff, and others, we'd like to hear more about this some other time. So, I mean, if he was talking about like something that was so foreign to them that didn't meld with how they view the world, I don't think anybody's going to give him the time of day to hear about this later. And one guy in particular that stayed around was named Dionysus. It says right here in Acts of the Apostles, chapter 17, verse 34. What a coincidence. And a woman named Damaris. Demeter? I don't know. But like we're talking about Adonis dying and Persephone coming back from the dead and Osiris and all that. Um Here we have this Dionysus, and there's wine is very much known. I mean, there was a story of Noah getting drunk on wine, and chapters of Isaiah and some of the prophets talk about the cup of staggering. And you know, Solomon said eat, drink, and get merry, but Paul was quoting some of the Greeks when he said you know, bad manners corrupt good company, that you know, not to have your god be your belly. And that's the problem with the Cretans, like the Minotaurs, you know, would want to consume people. And then here comes Jesus saying, me, I'm a Jewish person, and I want you Jewish people to eat me. I mean, that's just the most off the wall thing to say at the time. Whatever could he mean? And it says, um, so I guess Simile was blessed by thunderbolts, and Zeus saved his son by sewing him up into his thigh and keep him until he reached maturity. So he's born twice. Dionysus was then conveyed by the god Hermes and brought up by the Bacchantes or Maenads of Nice, a purely imaginary spot. As Dionysus appeared, represented the sap, juice, blood, lifeblood, elements of nature. So, I mean, they talk about in Ezra 4, um, second, the fourth Esdras 4, the Greek one, or first, second Ezra. They talk about in second Ezra, the Greek one, fourth Esdras, I think it's called. They talk about the most powerful things in the world, and they talk about women, and one of the things they talk about money, and then they talk about wine, and so it was well known. But the New Testament does not steer away from this. I mean, he's turning water into wine, and this is at the wedding of Cana, and so somebody come up to him and says, "Oh, you got this new wine, uh, that's better." Usually, people they got like, the save the good wine for the beginning, and then at the end they give the bad wine. But man, this party's already started, and now you're just turning up with the good wine. And it says, in Thrace, Dionysus was opposed by Lycurgus, who ended up blind and mad. In Thebes, Dionysus was opposed by Penthus' cousin, was torn to pieces by the Bacchantes when they attempted to spy on their activity. Athenians were punished with impotence for discouraging the gods' cult. Their husbands' resistance notwithstanding, women took to the hills wearing fawn skins and crowns of ivy and shouting the ritual cry, "Oi, oi!" Phenol, alus, possess charm, occult powers, and the ability to charm snakes. Would you look at that? Like at the end of the book of Mark, they have power over snakes. Paul in Acts chapter maybe 26 was bit by a snake, and they thought he was a god, as well as the preternatural strengths enabled him. So the Bacchus, Thunderer, Bullhorn, Bullface. I don't know. He's usually depicted as a panther. You can look at Wikipedia; they'll tell you that he's used as a panther. That's why in the Talmud Jesus is referred to as Isa Pantera, because the panther. So they know that there's a lot of similarities between Jesus and Dionysus. Dionysus, under the name Zagreus, was the son of Zeus by his daughter Persephone. At the direction of Hera, the infant Zagreus, Dionysus was torn to pieces and cooked and eaten by the evil Titans. And this is something I've been trying to tell people, but I haven't found the words, so I've been talking about it lately, is that when it comes to who's going to judge people in the Old Testament, it seems that a lot of people are calling God what was Satan. And that's because of the destruction that was promised to them. And this is so that they say, "Oh, you gave Jesus to God, his Father, as a payment for our sins." It's like, well, why would God want his son as a payment to be executed? Like, how does that make sense first? And then that's how I got into ransom theory of atonement, is like, that somebody that made all these humans and trapped them into these situations is going to want them to pay the ultimate price. And this has a lot to do with the Garden of Eden, because it's like God made it so people would die. It's like he didn't want them to live because they were trying to come up to his power, which is his knowledge. And this is true for the Tower of Babel. And I'm gonna wrap this up, but let me just talk about this situation where Paul was in Athens, and he's talking to all these people about this god of fertility. It says here, or the seasons, and the reason for all life and all this. Um, and so I'm thinking like he was telling them something that they could that really resonate with them. He looked at how his God fits into their scheme of things. And I don't think it's just like Father God, because that's how we think of it, like, oh, the God without form, whose name isn't pronounced. And but I think that has more to do with we don't know Jesus' name. It's like his name is hidden until he comes in the last day, and his name is righteous and true. So, that's the word of God. So what's not word of God is what's not righteous and true. And so when it comes to, the capriciousness of making people suffer, it's like, why are we blaming Jesus for a lot of these things when he wasn't very judgmental? A lot of people say, oh yeah, he will be one day. But I think that in doing that, they're missing the point. It's because they have become what was what Jesus came to correct, which was the 11th hour worker jealousy. So all these 8 a.m. workers are jealous of the 11th hour worker because here he gets off easy, and it's not their coin to give and it doesn't cost them anymore. And so it's like, why are you unhappy with $1 billion because everybody else has 2 billion? It's like, it's something internal of somebody that only chose the religion because if the chief seat gave you, or the promise that one day you'll rule over other people, or something like that. And so it says Zeus struck the Titans. So this is that baptism by fire. So I think the lesson of the Bible, New Testament, is basically saying you can accept Jesus by baptism by fire, meaning wash yourself of your old self and get the Spirit, which is the love of your brothers and sisters, or get punished, and it's not because Jesus is the God of punishment, it's because their God is the God of punishment, and they had made up all these rules that you're evil because you didn't follow our God, and therefore we're good. Well, if they're the ones that are following, if their enemies are the ones that are following God, and everything that you judge following God by, such as whether or not you have a city and a priesthood and everything like that, clearly shows that you were wrong, then how can you sit there and say, oh, this isn't the Messiah, this isn't the what Daniel talked about, when everything uh, kind of lines up to that time period? Because you have to remember that the time from Abraham to Jesus was shorter than the time from Jesus to now. So you can't say the whole, you know, Bible, the first 1,500 pages, you know, that was just the prequel, and then the last part is the movie, and we're just waiting for the sequel. I mean, it doesn't really add up, because especially when Jesus kept on saying, in this generation, in this generation, in this generation, something would have happened by then, and that something is what I'm talking about. I'm not saying Jesus lied. I'm saying that something is the destruction of the Titans. So these were the people of the divine spark, the sons of God. This is, that was their privilege, the chief seats, that when you wanted to get forgiven, you'd go to the priest, and they would you'd have to give them one of your animals, or pay a certain price, and because it was. And LeBron James does it today. LeBron James has his own rabbi. He pays him tons of money just to get close to him. And so these titans were destroyed. So I think that's the lesson that Paul is getting to, is which is the same lesson basically Josephus came to. And it's the same lesson that the Romans would want them to have, because it would have made things a lot easier. But instead, they fought to the bitter end until there was nothing left. And um, Herod's temple even included Zion. Zion right now is forsaken. If you look at the statistics of outside the city to the southeast there, where Zion was, it's like 92% Palestinian. I mean, they had forsaken in the wilderness of Caleb, Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron al Khalil, but only recently decided, well, we're so powerful and this is such a important religious city, why not just take it? And they have been doing just that, starting with terrorist attacks and things of the sort. And and that goes both ways. But it does stand to reason that it was a mostly Palestinian city for time immemorial. And but yeah, I mean, it says right here, it says the followers of Dionysus includes fertility. He took a bestial shape. He talked about the panther, um, ivy, wreath, thysis. I don't know what that is. Canthogris. But a goblet too. Yes, the goblet. I mean, when you think about the um, Indiana Jones, what do you have? There's like a chalice or a goblet, which symbolized, you know, Jesus and eternal life, and Mary, and uh, but yeah, Dionysus. Like, I think that Paul knew it's the problem that we miss, and I don't think it's as Derek Lambert says with, oh, it's just a history copying off of their histories. No, I think it's their mythologies, and it is called myth vision. But I think he's missing. I think he has talked about Dionysus, but I mean, I think this is incredible. This dying and rising God wine that said that, oh, what did the Titans do? They ate him. They ate him. So Jesus is telling the Jewish people, the ones that are going to kill him, you need to eat me, literally eat me. And so when he goes in the temple causing a ruckus, putting himself in grave danger with the authorities of the temple, grave danger, was saying, I am consumed with zeal. And that's how these folks were, where they allowed themselves to die. Look at Masada, where it's like, oh, we would rather die than live under your government. It's like, you can't expect the emperor of Rome to be taking over this, taking over this, taking over this, and have his own strategic things in order, and make like a special exception for you. If you just think you're so exceptional, you have to be different and things like that. It's, I mean, we have to have recognize this holiday and that holiday and this and that. It's like, yes, I agree. I do respect the minority groups, and I think the Romans did too, to a certain degree, until it became unfeasible to allow the rebellion anymore. And this is largely when the Idumeans came over, kicked the kind of more Greek favorable Jewish people out, and were very much into a very desert nomadic Judaism, uh, which was very popular at the time. I mean, the people that were coming from Parthia to support that Western Front were very much enculturated with Eastern thought. But this was very bad because a lot of them like burned in the city, and they all, so many people lost out so much from all this destruction and war. I'm not blaming these Idumeans. I mean, the Romans have their own fault in it to, try to enforce a police state. But I just don't think it's as simple as a lot of people like it. That there's just the evil Romans and then the good Jewish people, and then God never said it, even though He said, "I'll tell you everything's going to happen." But there was a pause put on things until we just, used a bunch of first temple prophets talking about the second temple to apply to the third temple and create this whole thing in our own selves, because this is where this is arising. There's no reason to create a third temple. It doesn't make any logical sense, but people in their own spirits have came up with these things. And so things happen in the physical world. Judas betrays Jesus, but it's like Satan came into him. Saul tried to kill David, but Satan came into him. David numbered Israel, but Satan came into him. And it's like Satan wanted Jesus. What did Satan want Jesus to do? Oh, you don't have to die. Oh, you can be the best. This and that. All these flashy things. And it's the same thing that the Jewish people, the other criminals, everybody's saying to him, oh, yeah, get yourself off there. If you're a Messiah, you don't have to die. Peter, even himself, you don't have to die. I'm not going to eat your flesh. What are you talking about? It's like, well, what if this was helping Jewish people? Because it's like now you have a religion. You don't have a temple. This is before rabbinical Judaism. Rabbinical Judaism did not exist back then. So it's like you don't have a temple, you don't have a priesthood, this and that. What about a religion where it all becomes spiritualized, where you lose these aspects of yourself that keep you from allowing you to see that we're people too, that we have our own customs and stuff, and it doesn't make us evil. What we eat doesn't make us evil. What we would believe in doesn't make us evil, And it seems that was too far-fetched of a notion at the time. It's like, no, we have a national God and we're a nation. So either you succumb to our nation or leave us until the day that you one day do succumb to our nation in what's called Shabbat or Shalom, the fullness of time. But to Paul, the fullness of time is when all these Gentiles fall under him. But I don't think it's as Adam Green says. I don't think it's some vast conspiracy by a monolithic lockstep group, to manipulate us. Probably more the opposite. It's probably more like Josephus, where it's a one Jewish person, such as the Apostle Paul or Josephus, writing to other Jewish people, talking to other Jewish people, trying to get them to see that by assimilating, by getting rid of these peculiarities that make being separate less useful, because being separate was a big part of their identity. That's separate and holy were almost interchangeable. And by assimilation, that this could be peaceable, that there, like even today, like it was anti-Semites who were trying to deny assimilation. They were saying wear Jewish clothing. Your own Talmud says it. You should do this and you should do that, so you be more Jewish, so that we know whom to target. But I see a future where people are respected regardless of their religion. So you could have Jesus as your God and be Jewish or Christian. Either way, it's like you don't have to be different and hoping for a day when you can rule over everyone if you just sacrifice more of yourself. I mean, similar to Muslims, they have this same thing. Oh, if I deny myself, then one day in heaven I'll get this reward. And, you know, it's like the 11th hour worker is hated. It's like in Isaiah 11:13, it's like um, Judah, who is Esau, hates Israel, who is the Canaanites. And it's like because they are jealous because Shiloh is where God was at the time of Isaiah. And um no, not the time of Isaiah. But before the time of Isaiah, Jeremiah says, go look back before the time of David and see where Shiloh was, because that's where, God first had his temple. But yeah, I don't. I think that with like Dionysus, it's like picking up on the sentimentalities of Gentiles. That it's like it says here. It says in Acts 17, and the verse is 32. We should like to hear you on this some other time. We should like to hear you on this some other time. And some of them might not have ever wanted to hear it. You know what I mean? That I definitely invite that. But there probably were a few that it's like, yeah, this Jesus kind of reminds us of, like if you read about Adonis, like we were reading earlier, it says that he was a Semitic, and what was it? One of them was based on Ishtar, and I can't remember, it was um, Aphrodite or something, was based on Ishtar or something, and so it's not just Greek. It's like these ideas were everywhere. I mean, like maybe in the Second Temple there was no paganism, but there's paganism in Israel in the First Temple. I mean, it's not like they got rid of all Canaanites even. I mean, give me a break. And but yeah, I just think that, so you have the Christians, they can accept, oh yeah, this is kind of like what we believe, but the Jewish God is supreme still, and we'll get into all these Jewish legends and get rid of our pagan, and that helps too with like the God of the Gaps. It's like, yeah, we don't really need all these spring rituals for it to be spring. It's spring regardless. Let's use God for the things that we can't use science for. And I think that has been influential and helpful for humanity, getting rid of all these warring gods and histories and stuff. But so these Christians can keep some of their own sensibilities and culture while adopting Jewish mythologies, legends, and stories and histories. And Jewish people can accept the Western control over politics and get to think that their God reigns supreme, and meanwhile get to assimilate and be brought into the fold, and everybody wins. The only problem with this is it's hard to get consensus. It's hard to get people's permission, and people agree to things that they permit. more than things that are suggested to them. And that's probably why Paul said in Romans 11 that a blindness has come over them. That they just like, wait, I didn't agree to this. But I don't think Paul is a fake person. I don't think Josephus is a fake person. I think that, you know, just like we can't blame all if some Jewish person owns a football team and, you know, has unlawful relations with a person, that we should blame all Jewish uh, persons. You know, it's like, but we're all guilty of that. Even Jewish persons will want to take external positive um, over application. Oh, yeah, Sandy Koufax, he was the best baseball player, or Max Baer, he was the best boxer, or Steven Spielberg, he's the best director. Oh, yeah, I'm like him, trying to get benefited from it. But if I talk about Baruch Goldstein, they would want to distance themselves. Oh, I'm not like him. And I don't think either is really appropriate. So I don't think Paul can speak for all Jewish persons. But it is peculiar to see a conclusion, a very ingenious conclusion that St. Paul the Apostle came to. And I mean, you can see Paul in it. You can see he even says, "I speak like a fool." You can see that he still cares, like in Romans 9, about his own people, and he wishes himself from curse. So Paul trips up on his own words. He's got his old ways, But I don't know why people think that Jesus was a devil or Paul was a devil, or maybe Josephus. I can see that. You know, maybe he sold out, but I mean, who wouldn't? Like, who wouldn't sell out? Like, I mean, when the Inquisition happened and they told a bunch of Muslims, you have to accept Christianity. A lot of people did. Like, people changed their religion. Yep, sure thing. And they called like cryptos. They go into their own private spaces and pray quietly, and which was probably, I'm just gonna sign off. All right, peace.